Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's event here at Jesus College from the Intellectual Forum. My name is Julian Huppert. I'm the director of the Intellectual Forum. But those of you who know me well will be pleased to know I will be doing very, very little this evening. You have much more interesting people to hear from tonight. But it really is lovely to have you here for this event, whether you're here in this wonderful Frankopan Hall or joining us online, wherever in the world you may be. This is a truly global event. We've been running since 2016. As you'll hear in a bit, the college is rather older than that. And we've run a lot of discussions about many, many different topics. And this idea of legacies of slavery is one that we have come back to on a number of occasions, mostly with our Legacy of Slavery Working Party here at the college. And if you look back on YouTube, you can see some of those amazing events and discussions, and you'll be able to see more about this event as well. But I'm going to do very, very little else other than to introduce the master of this college. Sunita Elaine is an absolutely amazing person. I could take the entire time just talking about her biography, but I won't do that. She set up something else, becoming a CEO in her early 20s after a degree here. She's been on the board of the BBC. She's done so many things, but most importantly, she is the 41st master of Jesus College, my boss, and a wonderful person. Sunita, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Julian. Good evening. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our audience in the Frankopan Hall and also our audience online. It's a real distinct pleasure to welcome you to Jesus College for tonight's very, very special event, a panel discussion on A Long Juju, a feature documentary. I'm struck by the fact that our understanding of humanity is driven by our stories. Tonight, the worlds of storytelling, the persistent approach to discovery, and the application of science have intertwined to allow us the chance to get insight into the making and progress of The Long Juju, a feature documentary. It's a story that tracks the journalist Keme Nzerem's global quest to unearth his ancestors' role in the complex and enduring legacies of slavery. From contemporary London to the US Deep South, and the ancient forests of southeastern Nigeria, Long Juju traces Keme's global journey of discovery and healing. This evening, we're delighted to be hosting a panel discussion with some of the many people involved in filming and producing the documentary. Joining us on the panel in person this evening are Keme Nzerem, award-winning journalist whose story navigating his Black, British, American and Nigerian mixed heritage is documented in Long Juju. Adeze Nzerem, Keme's daughter. This story has been a part of her life for some time now. And joining us remotely are Bernice Bennett, an author and genealogist who was tremendously helpful to Keme as he traced his roots. Jamila Smith, a lawyer, family historian, and a descendant that Keme connected with through this project. And Evelyn Osuagwu, acting director of museums at the Nigerian National Commission for Museums and Monuments, and former curator of the Nigerian Federal Slave History Museum in Calabar. And chairing the discussion is Professor Mia Bay, Professor of American and African American Intellectual, Cultural and Social History here at Cambridge University, and very pleased to say, a Fellow of Jesus College. And not able to join us this evening, but hugely influential in the making of this documentary is Tolu Stedford, the Long Juju producer and co-director, and in the room is cinematographer Piers Lee. Speaking about this topic with a public audience is vital in raising awareness of the complex and enduring legacy of slavery, and we are truly grateful to the Long Juju team for bringing this important story to Jesus College. Thank you so much, and we look forward to a very meaningful and rich discussion. Welcome to Jesus. Thank you.
So I think we're just going to see a teaser from the as yet unfinished documentary. We've both heard stories.
Well, for me, this is not a story anymore. Humanity can be good or bad.
Is this the beginning of the cave?
The poor souls that went through this did not deserve what they got.
The last 5 years changed my world. I was fighting racism and its causes through my work as a journalist. We were on the right side of history, or so I thought. I got an email from my uncle, and in the email were a bunch of historical documents. One of them was a will. I read it, and I reread it, and I felt physically sick. I leave 2 Negroes. Wow. There were more. Negro boy Frank, $150. Negro girl Anne, $200. Negro boy Jethro, $170. Kind of speechless, really. It horrifies me. But I have to know what happened to them. Where are their descendants now?
I'm at the beginning of this journey and I don't really know where it's going to take me.
Prepare yourself with as much knowledge as you can and be willing to share.
More knowledge is better. Understanding history is better than ignoring it.
Do you think we'll actually get to the truth? Do you
Well,
actually ever
I will
to find out?
And I want to find out whether my own relatives were also participated in that. And the only place I could find out was to come back home and go to Arachuku.
This house where people were taken to be sold to the Europeans. Do you know if our direct family, that we were directly involved in the slave trade?
This family that is settled outside Arachuku from Arachuku was directly involved in slave trading.
I felt broken that we had done this. Is a direct paper trail, our African ancestors directly involved in the transfer of the very same people that my maternal ancestors then enslaved.
That's devastating, I think. Yeah.
I've read the names of human beings that were enslaved by my ancestors. I cannot unread them. They're people. My ancestors enslaved yours, and that's why we're here, and it's really difficult.
We have the names of our ancestors. Saying their names, you keep them alive.
It makes me sad.
Being able to understand your past and your family history is such a privilege. Everything that happened hundreds of years ago is still so relevant today.
This mirror had been held up. This is where I came from. We've both heard stories.
Well, for me, this is not a story anymore.
Testing. All right, hello everybody. So obviously this is a fascinating point of departure, though I have questions even about the point of departure. We were talking over dinner about how all it started with an email, but you told me at dinner that it took you a long time to really engage the email, to really think about it. So I'm wondering about how that happened and also what you learned from that first email.
So to set the context, I received the email actually quite a long time ago, but it wasn't really, I think, until I became a father, and obviously we have Addie here and my other daughter Grace there. It wasn't really until I became a father that I think the contents of it really began to. Something was inside me that I needed to deal with, and as I tried to explain in the teaser there, I had this very clear vision and identity as somebody from a mixed heritage family from Nigeria, from the States, living in London. We were good, and the email itself was just a collection of family documents, the kind of things that get sent around from time to time, a Bible and some wedding records, and then there was this will. And in the will were those really for me, devastating words that confronted me with a history that was hidden in plain sight. That my white American family had been enslavers, and I didn't really know what to do about this. All of the emotions that I now learn, people that go through this process of discovery, suddenly flooded in. The guilt, the shame, the confusion, the anger, the curiosity. But it sat there for about a decade in my inbox until something, I think, changed in my life that led me to realize I needed to resolve this for myself. And it wasn't until then that I began the process of figuring out what it was I needed to do with this realization that my people were not who I thought they had been. And as a consequence, I didn't think that I was the person that I thought I had been. So it was a very, very profoundly impactful process of realizations and revelations and self-reflection that actually took quite a long time to end in action of some kind.
All right. Well, how did you then go about finding these family members on both sides of your family that you ultimately explore?
So there's obviously two bits to this story. There's the US side and the Nigerian side, and my dad is here in the front row. My mum, I think, is dialing in, but unfortunately she couldn't be with us tonight. And to just say a little bit more about what we did next, my dad had heard lots of stories when he was young about the potential that our Nigerian people had also been involved, but in abduction and kidnap, rather than the re-enslavement that happened on the American side. And so both of these twin paths were really starting to prey on my mind. And I had no idea what to do about this. All I had was a will. The first step, I went to the Smithsonian African American, the NMAC in DC, and they have a family research center there, and I took the will. I used to live in Washington. I took the will and asked, what do I do? How do I progress? What is somebody in this position confronted with this very, very potentially life-changing set of facts? What do you do with this? And I'm delighted to say that in the screen up there is Mrs. Bernice Bennett. And I'm hoping that she will be able to take up some of this story, because the Smithsonian said, aha, what you need to do is find somebody who has dedicated their life to this kind of work. And to just name that, it is reconnecting Black families, diasporic African families, with their stolen histories. And Bernice Bennett is the woman that the Smithsonian said I should speak to, because she had specific expertise in the town, Edgefield County, South Carolina, where my white US ancestors had eventually settled, where they were then would go on to enslave people, where the will was written, where the will was notated, where the will specified named people had been enslaved on a farm that was run by my white ancestors. So that was the beginning of the process. Find a person to help you. Bernice was that person.
All right, so you ultimately ended up meeting your ancestors, finding all sorts of connections.
So when I read that will, it wasn't just a case of learning that my ancestors had been enslavers. I was given names of people.
Okay.
This story was immediately humanized for me in a very, very deep and visceral way.
Specifically, you were given names of the people who were enslaved, right?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Cato and Jack. And then as I read on and discovered more, lots of other names. Eventually we discovered dozens, and I'm fast forwarding somewhat. But because those individuals had been named, and as discussed somewhat in the teaser, these were people that I couldn't forget. And I needed to know what had happened to them. So to be clear, these are not my ancestors. They are individuals who had been enslaved by my ancestors. And when one starts, the logical conclusion of wanting to know what happened to people is, well, did they have children? Did they have descendants? If they did, where are those descendants now? What happened to them? What has been the impact of this cursed history on those individuals? Have they prevailed? And I don't want this to sound like a kind of a naive romance, but when I heard that, I really wanted to know their stories. What happened? And Bernice thankfully explained to me that this was an entirely natural emotional reaction. And if I wanted to, and if I was really prepared to commit to the journey, then it might be possible to find some of those individuals. But doing so is fraught with all kinds of challenges, technical and emotional, and you know, it's all well and good for me to say, I wonder what happened to those descendants and would they want to meet me? But who am I doing that for? Is that for me to just feel better about this? What is in it for them? Why on earth would they want to meet me? Why would they care who I am? And going about that research process of trying to find and connect with somebody safely is difficult and needs to be done with care. And I'm very thankful that Bernice helped me with that. And yes, at the end of that line, we were able to connect with a number of families who were looking for their stolen ancestors, who were interested in partnering, meeting with, communicating with a descendant of the family that had enslaved their ancestor. And that is Jamila, who is smiling at us there.
Oh, wonderful. So you traveled to the United States, you met with Jamila, and at what point did this become a film idea that you were working on?
Well, so my professional background, I'm a journalist, I'm a visual storyteller. And I was very, very lucky to have met Piers, who is our DOP. They're daintily moving about the place, filming. We're old friends from university. And I told him about this journey that I wanted to go on some years ago, and that I wanted to, I was thinking of some way of trying to tell this as a film story. And he said straight away, well, let's not overthink it, let's not overplan it. Let's just film it. Let's just film this as a natural journey as it evolves and develops. And he's been with me from the very beginning, from the first research trip to Edgefield County in the archives to meet Bernice, to Nigeria to investigate my dad's family's side of the story, where we met our other guest, who's also on the screen, Evelyn Osuagwu, who is the director of national museums in Nigeria and was at that time the director of the Calabar Slave Museum, who we went to visit. And he was with me filming when, after quite a long process, as I'm sure we will get into at some point, when we finally met Jamila and her absolutely wonderful family, her mother, her aunties, her daughter Navaya, and connecting with Jamila has been one of the most moving and deepest things I've ever done.
Wonderful. Do we have the technological capacity to talk to Jamila a little bit?
I believe we do. Let's try.
Jamila?
Hi.
It's wonderful to hear from you. Jamila, what was it like for you to have this connection come through? Was it something you were surprised by, or what was your experience?
Going back to when Bernice actually reached out to me first, I was flabbergasted. I did not know what to make of Kame, what to make of Bernice, whether I was being scammed or, whether the whole thing was real or actually happening. I had been researching my family tree for quite some time to that point, which my own research, I think, is what helped or aided Bernice to find us. I mean, she doesn't really need help, but it helped that I already had some of the documents that she had already discovered connected with my family tree. So it kind of made it easier for her to put the pieces together, from what I understand. But she reached out to me, and honestly, it felt like a breakthrough. That particular part of my family had been kind of like a mystery for us, that family history. My grandmother's father, the family story is that he was adopted by a relative and then they migrated north, and which is where Bernice found us in the census. And so there was so much information that we just didn't know. And most of our family still carries the Reinhardt name, and it's hard to carry a name and not know where that name comes from, the history behind that name, and what it means to even be a Reinhardt. So uh, I kind of jumped at the opportunity after doing some research and then speaking to Bernice and watching the YouTube video that Bernice and Kame had already done by that point, basically just discussing that they were looking for the the ancestors, the kin of the people who were enslaved by Kame's family, which then I called my mom and I was like, Mom, watch this, and then watched it again. And she was like, I'll let you look into it first and then we'll see. And so that kind of was like the beginning there for me on my side with this process.
Very interesting. Bernice, I understand you also have connections with Edgefield, South Carolina. That was one of the reasons you were an expert on it.
Oh, yes, indeed. My own family was enslaved in Edgefield, and I actually connected with the descendant of the enslaver. So I had a great deal of experience in Edgefield. I actually met my the descendant about 20 years ago.
What a small world it is.
It is, yeah.
It's definitely a small world.
So you guys all at some point got together in the United States. You met other connections there.
That's right. You want me to answer or Jamila to take that up?
Go ahead.
Sure, yeah. Bernice had helped me understand that the world of tracing Black history for those of us Black people who don't have a direct connection to our African ancestry is fiendishly complicated, as you will know. The lacunae that is created by people literally being shipped down the road in the middle of the night, names changed, all the stuff, the sexual violence. This is a very, very hard thing for African diaspora to research. And Bernice advised me that the best way to find people is to be as public as you can about what you know. And rather than rely entirely on your own research, to use the hive mind, to put out what you know and to tell the world what you're looking for, and to try and short circuit the research, because other people will be looking for their own histories. And if you can meet in the middle, then everyone's a winner. And by definition, that means that people that are interested in dealing with this contested history find each other, because this is contested history. It's very difficult. There's a huge amount of emotion and unresolved trauma in this space. And you can't go into it blindly or without care. And so after quite some time of putting that message out there, people like Jamila and another family who came forward to say, look, actually, I think we should meet. We agreed that we would do that. Very, very carefully, and I've got to say, I was really, just from my own perspective, I was very nervous and scared because I didn't know what it would be like. So Piers and I went to South Carolina and arranged to meet Jamila. And I mean, I'll remember this moment. I remember it like it was yesterday. Jamila, Bernice, do you remember when we met in the parking lot that day?
Yes.
I
Definitely.
I don't even want to take the limelight here about what it was like to me, because actually I feel that this story, part of this story for me is about making sure that actually the other people that are part of this get to tell it. So do you mind if I cede the floor and allow either Bernice or Jamila to describe in their words?
Sure. So it was like the first summer after I started law school that we kind of all agreed to meet in South Carolina. And for me, I was so excited at the prospect of like getting to see the research and meet Keme and Bernice. We had talks several times to this point, and to just be in the space, an environment that I knew my ancestors had been and touched the land and smelled the air. And to that point, I had not been to South Carolina yet. And I will say that meeting Keme and Bernice there, I was not prepared for the impact or how moved I would be. But I will say, when my mom and I pulled up to the hotel that we were staying at in South Carolina, we literally opened the door and my daughter just runs out and hugs Keme. And for me, I felt like that was just a sign that everything was going to be okay, that whatever we experienced from that moment forward would be okay. And just thinking about it, even now, it's been some time since we met in South Carolina, and just speaking about that experience, I'm moved to tears now. You don't realize going, or at least I didn't. Bernice probably knew the impact it would have on Keme and I and the rest of my family, but I didn't know at that point that when I left North Carolina, where I live, and arrived in South Carolina, when I left South Carolina, I would be a different person. And the experience to this day, I still think about, and it still moves me, and I feel like I'm still processing it, because like Keme, seeing the documents and feeling like it changed him, this experience changed me and who I thought I was, and where I thought I was coming from. And kind of like what Bernie said in the clip, this experience has given us the opportunity to speak the names of our ancestors again, and pay homage and respect to the lives that they lived and the experiences that they had, that our own life experiences are built on. And we still benefit from their strength to come through those experiences.
And I just want to say, I mean, that was a very emotional experience. simply because we had been talking to each other for quite a while. And one of the things that people may not truly understand is that Keme had a list of names, first names, not last names. And so we had to do like a reverse genealogy. That means getting the names that he had on these documents and moving forward. And my role in this whole process was to find the evidence, the proof, so that we could make certain that we were connecting with the right people. And as Jamila said, she heard the podcast because we had a multi-layer process. One was going public, which meant that as a descendant of an enslaver, he let the world, basically, he let the genealogy community and others know of what he was trying to do. And he was very transparent, which was important. When you think of the ethics, you have to be transparent and explain what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so everyone understood that he was documenting this journey, but felt compelled, deeply compelled to find those descendants of the people that his ancestors enslaved. And, you know, I just commend him for what he initiated, and also Jamila for following through. Because as you said, you thought maybe you were being scammed, but no, it was definitely real. And we had the documentation to support reality that at this time, this point in time, that we could say your ancestors were enslaved by Keme's ancestors.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I want to also talk a little bit about the Nigerian side, because part of what's remarkable about this story is both sides of the family. I also would like to incorporate your daughter, but first let's start just a little bit with how you explored the Nigerian side of the family. I know that your father played a role in it.
Yeah, props to both mum and dad, actually. Mum literally did hundreds and hundreds of hours of very, very eye-wateringly complex internet research, so thank you to her. So Dad, when we started this process, when I first talked about finding the will, he was very clear-eyed about it. He said, look, I'm very, very proud and supportive of you trying to understand this history for yourself, but it is only right that if you're going to look into the American side, that you look into the Nigerian side too. And just to be clear, this isn't about trying to kind of, you know, this isn't about moral equivalence but the fact of the transatlantic trafficking system was that outputs require inputs, and somebody had to be involved in the input. So can we please just find out what happened, and we'll deal with the judgment bit whenever, if ever, but let's find out the facts. And these are the things that he had heard, that our clan, the Arrow, which is like a sub-clan of the Igbo, one of the 3 main tribes in Nigeria, were traders. One of the things that the Arrow bought and sold was people. And we must remember that back in that period of history, there was a certain amount of domestic slavery anyway. Again, not to kind of judge, I'm not casting that aside to say, oh, slavery anyway. You know, this is, that slavery was slightly different in that it was a kind of more Roman form where one was not destined oneself and or one's increase, or as in progeny, to forever be a second-class race of citizens, or sub-citizens. It was a different kind of slavery, but over time, it was corrupted by this huge thirst for people on the coast. So what Dad had heard was that the Arrow were very, very involved as middlemen in internal trafficking, and that specific, and this is where it starts to get close, uncomfortably close to our family, not just our clan, but people that we are blood related to. We had also heard stories that our family had a connection, we were not entirely clear what it was, with a shrine in the forest where abductions took place. And that one of our ancestors had been some kind of chaperone or guard who was connected to taking people to this place where some people would later go missing. That's a very abbreviated version of that story, but Dad had heard this story and said that we should find out. Can we find out if this is true? Can we find out that our people did that thing? And research is very different in Nigeria when we're looking at that period. There aren't written documents in the way that there are in the US, but there is memory. There is oral history, and there are museums and local places where those stories have been passed down. So to get those histories, you have to go. You can't Google it. And the great thing about Google, of course, is these days, a lot of the American stuff is codified and scanned and documented, and you can find it. You might have to pay a subscription, but you can get there. Paying your subscription in a Nigerian sense means buying your plane ticket and going to the place. So Dad and I went to our ancestral homeland, which is a town called Arachukwu in southeastern Nigeria. And we spent what started as just me and him going to a festival and then arranging to see local people. Then my cousin found out and he said, "Oh, can I come?" And then my uncle said, "Can I come?" And then in the end, it was a bus. So there's a bus load of Nzerems went to our ancestral homeland to partly to take part in a very, very joyous harvest festival, but part of it was also to try and investigate what we could of this very, very difficult history. And we spoke to elders and griots and kings and fishermen, and we went to the shrine deep in the forest where these things were said to have happened. And the shrine is still managed by the priesthood, and the priests now are the descendants of the priests then. So these stories are kept, and they confirm to us, yep, this is what happened. So there was a network of what we call oracles, and they were senior kind of spiritual figures who you could go to for a blessing if you know, your harvest was poor, or you were trying to have a child and you couldn't, you could go for a blessing from the oracle. But they doubled up as a court service, as a very sophisticated and respected court service. And one of the ultimate sentence in that court system was death, as it is in many parts of the state still now. But the execution, if you were sentenced to death, would happen in the cave, deep in the cave, but no one could actually see it. But for justice to be seen to be done, once the throat was cut, the blood would trickle into the river, and if people wanted to come and see justice being done, they would spot the blood coming down, and they would know that the person had been killed and justice had been served. But at some point, someone realized, well, if we just cut the throat of a goat, then the people will see the blood and think that the deed has been done, and we will smuggle the still alive person out the back, stick them on a boat and sell them. And what the priests and the kings confirmed to us was not only was this story, that the thing happened, that the suggestion was that at some point in our history, one of our ancestors had been one of those chaperones. I mean, there are many, many layers to this story that we probably don't have time to get into. One of them is that, and this is where this stuff gets really complicated, right, and nuanced. One of the stories is that every person that was taken by our relative for judgment at the oracle came back alive. So, does that mean that we're off scot-free? Well, what happened to the other person? We were still part of the system. Now, so that's where this whole judgment thing becomes very, very hard. And it became very clear to me from the beginning that I never wanted to pronounce on what was right or wrong. I wanted to go through this process for myself, to know and fundamentally to know what had happened.
So you worked with Evelyn Osuagwu to find some of this material?
Yes, Evelyn is. Dad and I met Evelyn at the Calabar Slave Museum some years ago.
So, Evelyn, yes.
Good evening. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for.
I was the curator of Slave History Museum, Marina Resorts, Calabar, Nigeria. As at the time, Kema was doing this research. I must sincerely commend him for the passion he has. And the topic is it's an interesting topic. And also talk about his interest in knowing his roots, knowing where he comes from. Ordinarily, other people wouldn't have bothered, but he showed great interest. And also, I must commend the dad too for also encouraging him, because I felt that the dad's encouragement also helped him to put up his research work on long Juju and the slave trade. Actually, we have put up an exhibition about the slave trade museum. It was not an easy thing for Nigerians, because that period is a period of, will I call it, dark age in the history of Nigeria. And at the same time, it also has its own good effects, but mostly it affected the country. That people feel emotional whenever they visit the museum, very emotional, but also help to also let us know some of the global trades that Nigeria participated. I'm happy to be here and also to be part of the history.
Thank you. I think we're all getting a lot out of this, and I want to turn this over for questions shortly, but first I have just a couple more questions. One, I know that this is something you've been doing for your daughters. Ada, you've grown up with this. What kind of lingering impressions has it left on you?
Well, I think background on this journey. So I think it was in 2018 when the filming for this film began, and I was 10, and I'm 17 now. So pretty much my entire life of what I can remember has been my dad making this film, but it's more than it's more than the film though. The film's just part of it. The overall picture is the legacy and our history, and what does it mean going forward. Me and my sister, we're next generation of the story, if you will. But I think it's hard for me to say exactly what it's left on me, because it's really been something that's just been here my entire life, and something that I've grown up with, this knowledge and this journey. You know, with the journey, there's a weight to it as well. And I think it's something that will stay with me always. I don't think there's ever going to be an end point to the journey. It's, yeah, you know, it's symbolic of everything that's going on. And in the topic of reparations, will there ever be a day when it's all repaired? Yeah, I think that's the point.
Yes, and I think that's a question for all of us, and perhaps especially for you, Keme, since you've been working on this for so long. How do you, you have obviously the film to put together, but how do you sort of make peace with this history of slavery in your family? Are there ways of, sort of having moments that are reparative or rethinking things? Is this journey, is this where your journey is going?
Yeah, I mean, I think reparations means lots of things to lots of people, and the reality is people are so scared of it as a topic because they tend to only see it in terms of
action.
Well, yeah, how much money and when, and once I've paid the money, am I done? You know, do I get to walk away? Have I paid my debt? And that is to kind of massively misunderstand the nature of the problem, because this is not about taking personal responsibility for what was a global social ill. The repairing, the structural repairing absolutely needs to be something that governments, that we do systemically. That's not something that I can do. What I can do is think about how this has affected me, the people that I love, the people that I've met, my family, black people, white people, all of us. What is the healing that we all need to do to repair this damage? And for me, that it is clear to me that that was about understanding the journey of the people that I read about in that will, and being as clear-eyed as I possibly could about the causes of that, who was where, when, what happens to them. And then that journey ends with, it doesn't end because the journey never ends, but it just in terms of the kind of, I guess, the heft of the healing process, the opportunity to meet and connect. Even though we have not done much of this, I've only spent a few days in person with Jamila, but I feel that meeting was so restorative and incredible and healing to me, to just be able to see and touch and feel the present of that history, and another incredibly rich and again, this is, I don't want this to sound like a fairy tale. It's not. It's complex, and I'm very fortunate that I've met such amazing people. But I think I have to recognize that in conducting the research in the way that we did it, Jamila and Felton, the other amazing man that's not on this call that we met, self-selected. They wanted to go on this journey, and there are going to be lots of families who have been very badly affected by the outcome of this history that I'll never get to meet. But another incredibly, another growth moment for me, and that sounds glib, doesn't it? But there you go, I've just said it anyway. Dad and I went for a family reunion in the States, in Philly and Baltimore a couple of months ago. Much of Dad's family, many of his siblings, ended up moving to the US. I can't tell you how beautiful it was for me when we realized we were going to be able to call Bernice, who lives in Baltimore, so anyone who knows the East Coast of the States knows it's really just around the corner, and say to her, hey, do you want to come and meet my Nigerian relatives? And she came with her husband, and we ate fufu, and everybody sat round and introduced each other, and we drank palm wine and told stories and sang and danced. I mean, it was really, really meaningful for me.
It's like closing the global circle of the ask for, at least briefly.
Growing the global circle, growing it,
yes.
yeah.
All right, I want to open up this to some questions from the audience, because I feel like they've got some of your story and may well have questions to ask at this point. On the back.
We've got somebody with a mic that can run the questions as well.
Thanks so much. That's really interesting sort of journey that you've been on. I was really interested in what you said, Jamila, about how you feel moved to tears, and that experience really stayed with you. I kind of think I understand, but I would really like to understand better why it was so moving for you to have that meeting, what it meant to you, and also what it meant to you as well, but particularly to you, why you felt like everything was going to be okay, your daughter ran out. Because I would have thought it would have been a bit like, I wouldn't have necessarily felt like that, so I just wondered why.
So for me, I think this whole journey really starts with not really knowing that something was missing in my life and in my understanding of self and who I am. Because what I was missing was taken from me before I had even been born. And so it was like meeting a version of yourself that you did not know you needed to meet. And for me, I was in a place in my life of transition. I had mentioned I had just started law school. And if you had a chance to read my law school application, part of the essay that I wrote for that spoke to my desire to make an impact for my community. Because when I looked around at the people I loved and the people that looked like me, and their experiences within the American justice system, I felt a call of responsibility to that if I had the chance that I should do something. And so I had embarked in law school to try to meet that kind of inner calling. And at the same time, there was this piece of me I didn't even know needed to be realized in order to really even embark in that direction, in that journey. So it was kind of a culmination of those two points in my life coming together, and even kind of piggybacking on the last question about how do you move forward, what does reparations mean. It's part of that is reclaiming a part of yourself that you lost and you didn't even know that you lost, that history, not really even knowing who you are, where you come from, and having that other piece, because Keme's project also offered the Nigerian story, a story I don't think I had even heard before. Like I had come in with the understanding that there was some participation on the African continent in the trafficking of the African slaves. But what did that look like? How did that happen? How did we even get there? When we arrived in South Carolina, at that point I had already seen the initial trailer for The Long Juju, and I had gotten to see Keme's trip to Nigeria and his father's village. And so when I got to South Carolina, it also kind of hit home to me how similar that area and that region in South Carolina looked to Keme's father's village, and kind of gained an understanding of why we even got to South Carolina to begin with, and that they needed us to cultivate the land because the land looked a lot like the land in Nigeria. And just it's so much to process. It's so much to process. It meant so much. And oftentimes on the other end of these journeys to get more information, there isn't a person like Kame who wants to share that information. And I felt privileged to even have the experience to have Bernice and Kame. Bernice with her experience going through this before, and Kame's willingness to be vulnerable, to make the information that he knew available. He made other members of his family that he knew, he went to them and asked them if they would make themselves available, which they did. And it gave to me a gift I could not even give to myself. I could have went to South Carolina on my own, just from the research that I had done. But the value that I got from being able to connect with our other Reinhardt family and other descendants of the Reinhardt family, both on the white side and on the black side, because there is a DNA connection there as well. And just getting an understanding that we are all more connected than we even realize. That's a lot. Hopefully answered your question.
May I? Thank you so much, Jamila. If maybe I could just add in part of the work that we did. We went to the archives and we looked for more information about Jamila's ancestor and how and his past, where he lived, what the connection was, and we also went to a number of locations locally, including an informal cemetery. So throughout the South, I don't know how familiar you are with that kind of bit of the American settler experience. There are, before the land was kind of fully codified and parceled off, families would just bury people in their backyards, essentially. And those cemeteries tend to be marked by a quite formal central zone where all the kind of white matriarchs and patriarchs are buried, and then towards the outside you'll have the white yeoman farmers, the poor farmers, and then if the enslaved people had been baptized, then they might also be in that kind of informal cemetery. So Piers and I had found some unmarked, some what appeared to be rather geometrically placed stones some time ago. We speculated that maybe these were the remains of the markers they were unmarked graves, essentially. We later connected with a white relative who confirmed that was the case, and then a large number of us went back to the cemetery and we had a kind of informal ceremony to speak the names of the people that we now thought laid there, and at least tried to do something. Anyway, that is just to explain that we have tried to do a number of things to explore this shared history together and to learn more about this history that was taken from all of us. And for me to just, I guess, add something to what Jamila just said, for me to know that I have been able to play a role, some role, in another Black family, learning more about their history. And like Jamila said, you know, the people are doing this work anyway, so it's not like, hey man, look at all this stuff that I've done. But to just be able to be part of that process, to think that I have been a help, is the healing for me.
We have a large online audience, so there's a number of comments and questions here. And just firstly, Anne says, not a question, but to say that the ladies on the internet panel inspire me as a white woman. Thank you. Particularly calls you out, Evelyn. Bless you. You are the root of all the history. So I did that. But the question I thought I would put was from Paul Klein from Anglia Ruskin University. He says, the Buddhists have a concept of shakubuku, or hard enlightenment. In the West, we might call this a spiritual kick to the head that changes your reality. Does this chime with Keme's experience?
Yeah, it was a massive kick to, I mean, it was not just a kick to the head, a kick to the soft parts as well. And I think if it began with that, it has, enlightening is one of many ways to describe for me what the grain and the impact of this continuing journey has been. And as you know, obviously it began with pain and trauma, but I also want to make clear kind of, you know, the absolute objective pain was not mine. I just felt it in that moment. But the journey continues to be massively enlightening.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
So you've made a very strong connection with Jamila. What is your connection with your ancestor that enslaved her ancestor? Did you research it and feel any sense of knowing that person and what they were doing and why they left the money in the will?
So the history to this, interestingly, you know, we are having a global conversation about migration at the moment, which I'm sure everybody here and in the all of you joining online are familiar with. Human beings, we move, we're curious. And as a person of very mixed heritage, I was born in Zambia, my sister was born in Ireland, my mum was born in the States, my dad was born in Nigeria. We've lived all over the place. So this concept of borders doesn't really, I'm like, what is this thing? My dad's ancestors, the Arrow people, moved in about 1750 from what is now Cameroon over to southeastern Nigeria, more or less the same year as the Reinhardt brothers left Germany to go to the colonies to take up the offer of land from the British king. They went on a ship called the Caledonia. The British king was at war with the other people that he was trying to exterminate, the Native Americans, and he needed a buffer zone of other white people to stop the English people being killed, essentially. So the Germans took up that call. They were fleeing the religious wars. And the Reinhardts settled eventually in what is now South Carolina. So learning about their history has actually been very informative, again, because a lot of this for me was just, you know, I kind of want to know about my people. I want to know why people are where they are and what was happening for them and what they were fleeing and what they hoped they would be able to create. And I learned a bunch of other stuff, that in that part of South Carolina, German was the main language until about 1815. And also, the German farmers and stonemasons who my people were pretty self-sufficient, which is one of the reasons that the English king wanted them to go over there in the first place. And because they were self-sufficient, they generally kept themselves to themselves, and the whole industry of enslavement was generally something that the English planter people were doing. But because it was so much more lucrative, because they were literally stealing the labor of those people that they had enslaved, the Germans couldn't keep up, and they eventually ended up enslaving people too to run their farms, or hiring enslaved people, or whatever it might be. And that's the point that the Germans dropped the German language and started speaking English, because they had to communicate in English to deal with the English people that were selling them people. So learning all this history, which I've now started to get my head around, also I'm not excusing them, but learning about this stuff humanizes everything. And so when I then met and was, I have to say, universally welcomed and humbly received by my white relatives, who I'd never met before. Who's this weird black British guy with a weird accent knocking on my door telling me he's looking into his history and can you help me and can you take me to the cemetery and what do you think about this and what do you think about that? I think Jamila made a very important point that it would probably have been quite hard for her to do the same thing because she's a black American and I'm a kind of exotic, weird European British black guy. But I'm very fortunate to have been met on this journey by people that have been, maybe cautious for their own reason, but they have gone on the journey. People have showed up. They have showed up and they have said, we will hear you and we will help you. And that day when we decided to go back to what was previously a white cemetery to speak the names of the enslaved people who were buried in unmarked graves, my hitherto unknown white Southern relatives, they showed up too. Now, what happens next, especially given the political situation in the States, I'm not sure it will be easy, but those relationships are there and I hope that they can grow.
Can I ask a question to Evelyn? Because you're sitting in a country where there must be some aspects of people dealing with a complicitness with the enslavement trade. How is Nigeria? I don't know you can speak for all Nigerians, but how are those stories, which are just stories in people's mouths, passed down so that other people of today and through that time have dealt with that complicitness? Because it must be known from then, and it must be known today.
Can you repeat your question?
There are people who must talk still about what happened all of that time ago, that people were taken from the shrine, they were taken over to America, they were enslaved. What do people talk about now, knowing those stories? How do they deal with those stories?
As I said earlier, the period of slave trade was it's a watershed in the history of Nigeria. But we have nothing to do but to accept the history. It is part of our history. We have even the exhibition we put on. The exhibition is about the slave trade and how the slave trade contributed to the growth of Nigeria. It has its own bad effects. It contributed to our underdevelopment. What we are passing through today, it was part of the history, because most of the people that were sent on exile were mostly the youth who were supposed to develop the country. But despite that, it also has its own impact, because after the abolition of slave trade, the missionaries came and they brought education. They brought Western education. We have our own type of education before the coming of the whites. But they brought Western education, brought modern hospital, and a lot of innovation to the country. So we have, through our exhibition, we tell the story that yes, this thing happens, but at the same time, it also help in the developmental stage of our country, and also try to discourage people in continue with this slave trade, because even though then was transatlantic slave trade, today we are also witnessing another type of slavery, the modern day slavery. which is even worse than or similar to that of transatlantic slave trade. So we try to encourage our people from participating into it. Like if you go to Slave History Museum, we have in a temporary exhibition where we also showcase the modern day slavery that is happening today, human trafficking, early and forced marriage, forced labor, bonded labor, to mention but a few. So slavery had been there. Even before the transatlantic slave trade, we had slavery in Africa. But the type of slavery we have in Africa is not as bad as this transatlantic slave trade, because the slavery we have in Africa is such that a slave can be free. A slave have some kind of freedom. A slave can grow to become a king. Like I'm sure you must have about King Jaja of Opobo. King Jaja was an slave. He was from Imo State. He was sold to slavery to a king in Bonny. But he was from People's family. But he was able to pay off his slavery and establish Opobo town in Rivers State. So a slave in African mentality or Nigerian mentality can be absorbed in the family, unlike the type of inhuman treatment that slaves receive in Europe and USA. But I thank God that today, with education and his vision, those influences, the narrative has changed or is changing. Thank you.
Wow, Keme, what an amazing story you have told. I'm just mind blown by it. My name is John Dower. I'm a part of the Trevelyan family. My ancestors owned many plantations in Grenada, and I've been through some of the process that you've been through. Something that you mentioned early on was the feeling that you first had when you first found this out, which I can really sympathise with, because they were a lot of the feelings I had. And one of the main feelings was one of shame and guilt. And of course, I suppose when you feel shame, you're looking for atonement, you're looking for forgiveness. And the way that we did it was by apologising. Apology. In a way, it was more straightforward because it was descendants of people who lived on plantations in Grenada. So we apologised to basically the people of Grenada because we knew that many people were descended. Where did you get rid of your shame? Or I guess it's a process, right? Because it's not in any way simple. Is apology part of it? Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I guess trying to seek atonement is really the journey you're on, I take it. So can you maybe talk a bit about that? I'd be really interested to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, guilt, shame, shock, all of those emotions were there and are still there. And I think that if I'm honest with myself, part of my desire and need internally to know what happened and to meet people, it's not really about absolution, but I think there must be a part of me that thinks, I hope they turned out all right. I hope it wasn't that bad. I hope my people weren't that cruel. And of course, these are questions that can't be answered, especially when clearly, so the will was 1829, that's quite a long time ago. If you look at all the generations of people that have come since then, how many of those people had experiences that were directly affected in a bad way by the fact that they themselves or their parents had been enslaved? And then what's the social legacy of this? And that's kind of, that's one of the reasons I'm really glad that Addie's here as well, because she can maybe talk a little bit about how she sees some of the modern day legacy of racism playing out just in the daily lives of young people in London these days. But for me, I'm not sure that descendants want to be told by the descendants of the people that enslaved their ancestors. I'm not sure they want to hear "I'm sorry," but I am sorry, so I'm going to say it. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. But I mean, what does that? That doesn't fix anything, does it? So it's really complex, John, and I don't think there are any neat answers other than, for me, when I looked into what I needed to do, I did what I felt was right. And honestly, with the guidance of Bernice, who has been so incredibly helpful in terms of advising me how to navigate this process. Think about this. Think about what the other. It is a process that I hope continues. And there are things. I think there are practical outcomes as well. So to give you a very small example, the cemetery, where we now know there are enslaved people likely there. The land itself is now owned by the local electricity company. So far, they seem to be quite good about leaving it alone, although all the land around it, they are coppicing for wood. Because it's an informal cemetery and not kind of formally incorporated, there is a risk that someday someone's going to say, oh, you know what, there's some really valuable rare earth in there or something, I don't know. So what do we do with that? What do we, as an expanded family group, now do with that? There have been discussions with the University of University of South Carolina, and the local government to try and find a way to get it listed as a local heritage site. This history is really important in South Carolina, and it's part of the kind of tourism infrastructure. People learning more about this really contested history, or at least I must say, I haven't been back since Trump's been back in again. So maybe he's trying to get rid of it as yeah, hell, nothing happened here. Walk along. There are deeply personal things for me about processing that, but I think ultimately, hopefully, there are practical ones as well.
This has been a wonderfully interesting discussion, and I'm sure people have still more questions for you, but I feel like we should end here. For those of us who had a very long week, I know that you and Addie might be willing to take individual questions one-on-one after we break up, but I do want to thank our wonderful ladies who joined us, Bernice, Evelyn, and Jamila. We spoke so eloquently. We got a lot out of your discussion. And Keme and Addie, thank you so much. We really learned a lot, and we look forward to this film coming out.